Camila, this is the Global Digest think tank group. Why don't you briefly introduce to our audience what is your specific subject?
Well, my name is Daniela Herrera. I am a professor of international relations at the School of Advanced Studies based in Rome. And my main research interest is non-state actors and their impact in international relations. So I'm mostly concerned with positive actors like NGOs and civil society organizations, but also subversive actors, including terrorist organizations and organized crime and insurgents. And my main interest is to analyze all those non-state actors in the field of security and defense.
So it's coincidentally at the moment Israeli-Palestinian, the Hamas, you can say non-state actor. How do you know as you are professor expert on non-state actor?
Yeah, definitely. When we talk about organizations like Hamas, so we refer to organizations which are making use of violence and violent tools for reaching their goals, which are basically political ones. Yes, we consider non-state actors because from a purely theoretical point of view, they are actors that are obviously not based in a state, although Hamas is strictly connected to a specific political cause, but it is also a non-state actor because it's not legitimated. But at the same time, it is able to have an influence on the relations among different other actors in the region, and also alter the let's say the such relations, and with their own activities they are able to produce an impact. So there are a lot of discussions about the use of other labels like liberation, self-determination army, or Liberation Army, as the Turkish President Erdogan has used his label for defining Hamas. Yeah, but basically, we also know that the list of terrorist organizations is a quite politically driven tool, which is obviously managed by states, prominent states,
Right.
but yeah, they are definitely a non-state actor. Yeah.
Hamas used to be government before. So at that time, Hamas is in government. We can say they are state actor.
Well, it's very hard to say that because
At the
well,
time,
at that time, yes, because it's not unusual because, as I said before, these labels are used in a political way. So an actor may be considered as a political party in a specific specific historical period, and then turn into terrorist organizations. So this happened to Hamas and this happened to Hezbollah, for example, at the same time. But then things may change, obviously. It is also true that they are a specific case of political actors, a political party with armed wing. So obviously, we know that there is Hamas and there is also Al-Aqsa brigades. So it depends on how obviously actors may be employed. But at the same time, there is also a second thing which should be considered, which is the legitimization from people and representation of interests. So obviously, to consider an actor as government in a specific territory, specific place, this means that that actor is also recognized as government, is represented as a government. And this is hard to say, especially in these last years, that Hamas was actually representing Palestinian population, because we have seen that there were lots of confusion in the local political situation. There are several actors with the political actors with the Palestinian Authority, for example, with very, very different levels of legitimization. So I would consider this one as a keyword.
Right. It is interesting and complicated in international political arena, and especially non-state actor or any political party or political organization. If they become a government, they become state actor, and it can be also turned if they are not government. If they act terrorism, it becomes a non-state actor again, right? And what about state terrorism, like North Korea or any Iran, or if they state terrorism also there? Yes, two. One is non-state actor; they are not state terrorism, but state terrorism. They are state, but they are terrorism. Uh, how can you more clarify those things?
Well, this is very, very difficult and complicated. This is a very complicated question. Well, thank you for asking. Well, we are discussing
This
about different categories. So all these categories may be used by scholars, for example, just to clarify phenomena, or they are used obviously by policy makers for reaching some very specific political goals. So you
right,
were mentioning, for example, the state actors that are making use of a violent approach. So this recalls me the list of so-called rogue states. But this is another politically driven category. I mean, the list of states that are making use of the very, very strict definition of terrorism, the unconventional use of force. And so the states that are making use of terrorism are supporting other organizations that are defined as terrorist organizations. They are defined as rogue states, so states that are supporting terrorism, and obviously they exist in the global system, and they are part of the global community, and they obviously have an impact, because you mentioned Iran, for example, and then you mentioned Korea, if I have correctly
North
heard.
Korea.
North Korea, obviously, North Korea. So we are all discussing about those examples of states that are obviously, let's say, showing a non-cooperative approach towards other states. Well, in the case of North Korea, obviously, is much more radical in this sense.
Right.
But again, they are categories. Even non-state actor is a category that we may use for identifying some specific actors that are absolutely not a state. But as you said correctly, when some of these actors turn into something which is very strictly relative to a state, they become governmental. So, for example, an NGO or a movement that turns into a political party obviously is not becoming a state, but is becoming something more governmental. So it's not only being a state or non-state, but also the different dimension, non-governmental and governmental, in which many actors are working together, they're clashing or cooperating, but for sure they have an impact.
Right. What about Syria? Is state terrorism, or how can we consider it?
Well, I would say that Syria is a modern example of a proxy war. The proxy war were very popular during the Cold War, which were absolutely part of the rules of the game, because the two main powers were trying not to fight against each other. So they used to have several proxy war, and this was part of the rules of the game. But in this specific case, obviously, Syria is a proxy war. I mean, it's in the interest of many actors which are existing in the region and also outside the region, not to fight against each other, but to maintain this sort of instability I mean, it's very hard to label the war in Syria now because it's already becoming so long, like last conflict, like 12 years, and we see that there is a government which is considered as a legitimate government and an opposition which is fighting against this government, but at the same time, such opposition is very fragmented. So there is not just one movement of opposition against Assad, but there is a constellation of different actors. It's very difficult to identify who is fighting for. For sure, Syria is not a democratic regime. For sure, Syria is not showing a human face towards population, and particularly in respect to some minorities. For sure, Syria has let's say, a mild approach towards ISIS. But at the same time, the impression is that there is this conflict in the region, which is a lasting conflict in the region, and nobody intervened, first of all, no peacekeeping operation, no specific external intervention, and nobody's doing actually nothing for supporting the opposition or to change the local conditions towards a more peaceful settlement.
Maybe international, appetite or interest decline on Syria, or they just refrain from Syria, something like that. And maybe Afghan case will be maybe solid state terrorism. It will be more solid. Can you say like that? I mean, Afghans will be considered as solid state terrorism because of Taliban government, and they control the whole country. And they are not democracy, and they are extreme, radical policy and a lot of human rights violation on his own citizens. How can you consider?
How can we consider Afghanistan? Well, Afghanistan is obviously more than a non-democratic state. It's already a failed state. There is no real institutions, not any institution which are recognized or legitimated by local population. And obviously, from an economic point of view, there is no real budget. The country is mainly is very close to the economic collapse, and is mainly based on drug trafficking, as it was happening in the past, although now with different variations, obviously. The present group, which is called Taliban, is probably different from the previous one, the one which were the main target of external intervention. But at the same time, they are ruling the country with a political regime which is more than non-democratic. Is mainly based on terror or extreme radicalization. And on massive violations of human rights, because it's not just that people are not free, is something more, because there are, for example, about 20 million of women that are excluded from anything, from any job occupation, from schools, from universities. So I believe that this is the big hole in the region. But at the same time, it is also something which came after the gradual disengagement of the US and other Western forces in the region. I mean, it's not a surprise that the Taliban were there, and that the Taliban were going to be in power again, because there is also no real local opposition. Local forces were too weak to face the Taliban and to produce a reaction. And so it was clear that the Taliban were able to arrive to Kabul in a few days.
Right. Actually, yes, international community, abruptly departure from Afghanistan, and they unwilling to continue engagement with Afghanistan, in spite, at that time, Afghani democratic government, they have a very good weapon and modern weapon, better than Taliban. They equip, and also they have a good number of soldiers. But I guess, yes, as you mentioned, international disengagement gradually. And I don't know what's wrong with Ghani government. They also not able to stand by for their democracy country. They let them in, Taliban. So that was what we see in African case.
Well, you know, the Afghan population is very, very young. So there
Right.
are so many young people and very well educated people, because many of them studied in abroad, or some of them already, many of them studied in other regions like in Central Asia, and Central Asia countries, because of the OC Academy. So there were, I had a chance to meet many students from Afghanistan, and they were very well educated. They were fluent in English, also because for a little time, there was the American University in Kabul, which was quite active. So there is a very vivid civil society, local civil society, that could have been used in a very different way. I mean, Afghanistan could have been turned into a very modern and a progressive country. And obviously, the Taliban's are just killing the best part of the society, because they are preventing women to study, and they are substantially forcing people to leave the country. I know that many young students have already left the country. They apply for visa for going to the US or Canada or other countries where they can find a possibility for studying or for working if they are already graduated. So these are lots of knowledge that are substantially leaving the country. And it's a pity. I mean, it's normal in a non-democratic leaders, for non-democratic leaders to kill the most vivid part of the society. But this is what is happening in Afghanistan more than I mean, it is happening in many other countries in the world, unfortunately. Right. In Afghanistan, it's probably more visible.
So Afghan case also state terrorism, and North Korea also state terrorism. These are example of state terrorism. Maybe here is more complicated case. In case of Burma, Myanmar case, it's military coup, military control some capital city and central part of the country. They consider themselves as a government, but they are loosely controlled at the countryside, the country boundary. They are not able to reach out and cannot able to control completely. In fact, Myanmar was elected a lot of member of parliament in 2020. They are ousted by the military. So it is conflict between the parliament, members of parliament, and the military. So these two conflict in the country I don't know how international consider which is state and which is not state. And in fact, Burmese people representative member of parliament, they are people representative elected, you know. But a lot of diplomats are engaging with inside military control area with military government. So, I mean, the military is one side, the parliament groups member are one side, the people representative and the military is not people representative. These are very complicated. How shall we consider which is state and which is non-state? Can you say it's difficult to say member of parliament to be non-state, but neither European consider them as state. How's your view on that in Burmese case, Professor?
Well, yeah, very, very difficult, very complicated. Also, you mentioned case studies which are very, very different. So Afghanistan so far, but also you mentioned North Korea and obviously Myanmar. Very, very different examples.
Right.
Well, I presume that you are referring to the fact that sometimes in a non-democratic context, which may be a coup d'etat or a revolution or an uprising, external intervention sometimes, which is not necessarily going to be a peacekeeping operation, but sometimes the external interventions look at some parts of the society. So, for example, some movements or some members of political parties or some people who are symbols of the fight for freedom. But at the same time, it depends. I mean, whether they are considered as non-state actors, it also depends on the context in which they are operating and the tasks they have fulfilling. For example, I mean, members of a parliament are normally people elected or people appointed to a very specific task, which is referring to a political institution. So they are they cannot be considered as non-state actors. I mean, a non-state actor is usually an actor which has no specific or identifiable link with a government. Because it is an NGO, for example, an actor which is pursuing a cause which is a universal one or something which is common to many countries, or because they are a subversive actor which is trying to obtain a very specific goal. So, for example, a terrorist organization is usually fighting against a state or fighting against a coalition of states, so it cannot be a state actor. Even ISIS, when we mentioned ISIS in the past, and ISIS was pretending to be an Islamic state, but it was not referring to an existing state. They wanted to build an Islamic state. So they cannot be considered as a non-state actor. Well, the problem with non-state actors is also that they have to fight for obtaining legitimization, because a state is obviously legitimized to make policies, to decide something, to make decisions. A non-state actor has to always to fight for doing something, for pursuing a goal, and so on. But if you are your specific question about members of parliament, yeah, obviously they are living in a governmental dimension because they are part of an institution.
Right, but the thing is, you know, European ambassador, including your Italian ambassador inside Myanmar, they are dealing with military coup government. They did not deal with elected parliaments officially. So it is, you know, confusing. The people representative parliament members non-state actor or the military coup leader state actor, or how diplomats are dealing in line with the, the so-called state, and how can you categorize or make a clear line between parliament members and military coup?
Well, again, this is part of politics, and it depends on how things work in a specific region or a specific context. If you are talking about Myanmar, well,
Right.
unfortunately, I'm not a specialist on Myanmar, but I understand that for what I know, because I've studied for example, the role played by Aung San Suu Kyi political party in the past, and also the fact that there was a movement supporting this lady, and that the military elite was playing a role which is not a normal role, because obviously the military in a democratic country are in charge of defense, and they support in political institutions. In this specific case, we're a non-democratic country, obviously, the role of the military can be different from normal ones. So not on just being in charge of defense, but being more intrusive, let's say, of the political situation.
So how did you see diplomat dealing? How you should say the proper way diplomats should deal, how to deal with in terms of between parliament members and military coup leaders, how diplomats should deal, which one they should select them?
Well, you know, diplomats usually do not have the freedom to select those actors they want to deal with. They usually, they are not free. I mean, they usually, I'm not saying that they are slaves, obviously, but they are representatives of a specific country. They are also representatives of a country which is also supporting a member of the European Union, for example, a member of the United Nations, and so on. So if they usually refer to those, they address those people who are formally in charge of the government. So when you say why they are not talking to members of the parliament, they usually refer to those people who are officially representatives, and any other contacts with other people who have of political tasks also depends on the specific things these people are doing and the context in which they are operating. Can you please tell me a bit more on these members of the parliament? What are they doing? They are representatives of a specific party?
Of course, yes. In 2020, there was nationwide election. Aung San Suu Kyi party, NLD, was landslide win the election. A lot of NLD members, they are elected over about 70%, I guess. And military was coup in 2021. That time, they ousted all the parliament. There was protest, and later was violence, and a lot of members of parliament disagree with military coup, so NLD members of parliament, but military is with gun, they shoot and they kick them all the parliament. And it seems international community, they love with member of parliament, but they are living with military coup leader. So that is loving is different. Living reality living together with his military coup leader. So that is situation. So a lot of member of parliament are either at the border area or countryside, or they went to the overseas different country. So that is a situation in Burma. Still, military is in the middle of the country. They control the country.
Yeah, well, you know, when there are members of parliament that are representing the opposition, or they are regardless. I mean, I'm not expressing my opinions. If I have to express my opinions, obviously I would say that I'm in favor of democracy, regardless of any situation. So any opposition which is representing people should be supported, and also the international community should support those movements in favor of democracy and freedom, for sure. But I'm just trying to explain why this happens from, let's say, theoretical point of view. And that's obviously, if there is someone representing opposition, usually diplomats who are representing a foreign country in that specific country, if they refer to the opposition, they send a very clear message. So obviously this clear message cannot be an individual position. I mean, a diplomat obviously has an individual position, but is also representing a specific political position of a country. So sending clear messages is not always possible. I mean, it's different if I am just a scholar. I don't have to obey to anyone. I don't have to represent any specific condition. And obviously I can say that we should support the opposition in Burma. But then if I am a diplomat, I cannot immediately say that, because I always have to remember that I'm representing a political position which may have a different idea. So I'm not saying that the European countries are supporting the military, but they are dealing with those actors which are officially, let's say, playing a role.
Who
Yeah.
can
So
practically live together to deal practical things. That one, right? Because in democratic time, you know, all the representative parliament they are legitimate government. They have the right to form. They are the one to do the government things. But when in terms of weapon power, when military competing with the elected members of parliament, they are helpless, you know, even though they have the right to do governments, but the reality is controlled by military by force, you know, it's by force. When the military coup by force, even though you love member of parliament, you cannot get the government, something like that. So member of parliament, they are misunderstanding the real life, right? They have legitimate, they receive love, but they don't know. It doesn't mean they should sure to have a government, because military has power, guns power, and they can shoot, and they did by force, and they do government. So that way, the diplomatic are dealing. Why the reason to deal with military government? That, I guess, international political science, Professor, you explain, I understand like that.
Well, obviously, what you said is the representation of violence, because, as I told you, the military forces are also existing in democratic countries, but they are in charge of a specific policy field, which is defense. And obviously, they have no political power, because it's just the defense of a country. What you mentioned is a different thing. So there are military in a non-democratic regime which are exercising political power, and they are exercising such power with the use of violence against people, and against
Right.
those people against their power. So this is not absolutely, it should not be normal. And obviously, this is a violation of human rights, but also a violation of democracy. Also,
Definitely.
in
So we can say the military government is terrorist government, state terrorist.